Good evening and welcome to RFL. I am Richard French.
The Affordable Care Act has been the most consequential legislation that I have been a part of. This is definitely on a par with that.
That's not hype. It was a historic day today in D.C. as the House of Representatives passed a bill being called, I believe rightfully, the largest anti-poverty measure to come out of Washington in recent memory. Now it's going to head to the president's desk for Biden's signature, and tonight we are going to demystify this massive piece of legislation. We're going to show you that it's not just some other bill here. It's actually something that will make a material difference in the lives of millions and millions of Americans across this country. We're going to be visiting one part of our viewing area and really scope in there, northern New Jersey. We're going to take a look top to bottom at how this will provide immense help to that particular community. We're going to be speaking with the Congresswoman Mikie Sherrill, the lawmaker representing the 11th district. Then we're going to go into that district and speak with a mayor who's going to explain why the relief money is so desperately needed in his town. We'll also be joined by a woman. She runs a food pantry there that is feeding people who have never needed help in the past, plus a man who's had his hours cut, struggling to pay his family's bills. He'll describe how much the stimulus check will help him, his wife, and his 2 children. But let's begin with the bill itself, what it costs, what it does, and what the public thinks about it. And for that, let's turn to senior political correspondent Andrew Whitman.
Well, Rich, it took a couple of months of negotiations, a fruitless debate about the minimum wage, and lots of time-wasting delays, but Joe Biden's American Rescue Plan, better known as the stimulus, is now just a signature away from becoming law.
On this vote, the yeas are 220, the nays are 211. The motion is adopted.
Not a single Republican voted for the bill in either the House or the Senate, but Democrats were bursting after the vote, holding something called an enrollment ceremony for the bill. That's the formal step you take after passing it. And they boiled down the political fight to one crystal clear message.
You will receive $1,400 checks by the end of March. Help is on the way. Vaccines will be available far more quickly to far more people in a shorter time. Help is on the way. Our schools will open safely and more quickly than we thought. Help is on the way.
Might help perhaps be on the way. We also heard from President Biden after the vote as he announced another new deal to buy 100 million Johnson & Johnson vaccine doses. The president made clear he views the stimulus as both a lifesaver and a game changer.
Everything in the American Rescue Plan addresses a real need, including investments to fund our entire vaccination effort, more vaccines, more vaccinators, and more vaccination sites. Millions more Americans will get tested, including home testing. Schools will soon have the funding and resources to reopen safely, a national imperative. The American Rescue Plan, the partnership between Johnson & Johnson and Merck, proves we can do big things, important things in this country.
This bill is a big thing. Let's give you a reminder of what the bill's costs and what that pays for. Total cost, $1.9 trillion. Now, for comparison, that makes the Biden stimulus larger than FDR's New Deal. Put into today's dollars, the stimulus worth more than $1 trillion more than the New Deal was in modern currency. For that money, millions of people will get $1,400 checks, plus additional money for each child you have. There's money in there for state and local governments, plus cash for schools, transit systems, and pension systems. $300 a week enhanced unemployment benefits, and the first $10,000 of your unemployment benefits will be tax-free. It's got $39 billion in child care assistance to help get single parents back to work. The bill expands Obamacare eligibility and increases help to afford the premiums. It'll lift 13 million Americans from poverty this year, according to estimates, including 6 million kids. It would add about 20% to the average incomes of Americans making below $35,000 a year, and would help low-earning single parents even more. And this bill has bipartisan support among the public, sort of. Turns out Republicans only dislike the parts of the bill they've been told to dislike. Unfortunately, that includes the overall bill itself. 61% support among all Americans, 58% among independents, but just 26% support among Republicans. But let's go into greater depth. Republican voters have been repeatedly told how bad state and local aid is a key component of the bill, so less than 3 in 10 Republicans support that, although 6 in 10 other Americans do. And then you look at everything else that's in there: school aid, stimulus checks, child tax credits. They all get majority support from Republicans, just like they get majority support from everyone else. Another factor, Republicans don't seem to relate to the bill. Just 35% say it will help the economy. Even fewer say it will help people like them. Majorities of independents and all Americans think otherwise. The final vote was never in any doubt today, but there's still some drama on the House floor. Republican Glenn Grothman of Wisconsin was opposing the bill today and trying to attack what he called marriage disincentives that he somehow reads in the bill. They're not there, but Grothman's argument crossed a couple of lines.
Has a marriage penalty in it. I bring it up because I know the strength that Black Lives Matter had in this last election. I know it's a group that it doesn't like the old-fashioned family. Disturbed that we have another program here in which we're increasing the marriage penalty.
Black Lives Matter. Congressman Grothman, let me introduce you to Congresswoman Stacey Plaskett from the U.S. Virgin Islands, who the rest of the nation got to know during the second impeachment trial. Congresswoman Plaskett, care to respond?
He's talked about Black Lives Matter. How dare you say that Black Lives Matter, Black people do not understand old-fashioned families. Despite some of the issues, some of the things that you have put forward that I've heard out of your mouth in the Oversight Committee, in your own district, we have been able to keep our families alive for over 400 years, and the assault on our families to not have Black lives or not even have Black families. How dare you say that we are not interested in families in the Black community? That is outrageous. That should be stricken down.
Rich?
And there was that, Andrew. Thank you. I want to bring in our first guest to talk about this massive package. Congresswoman Mikie Sherrill, Democrat representing the 11th District in northern New Jersey. First of all, congratulations, Congresswoman. I don't think it's possible to overstate how big a deal this is for so many Americans hurting, right? I mean, a lot of times it's hard to put your hands on stuff that comes out of Washington, but that's not the case here.
That's exactly right. This is the bill that I have been fighting for months now. So to finally be able to get it across the finish line and to see how good it is for New Jersey families is incredibly exciting.
Talk about who it impacts in your district, and as best you can, put a human face on it.
Sure. As you know, this has been an incredible struggle for families, for small businesses, for many of our first responders, and especially for our towns and local governments, trying to figure out how are they going to keep all of the teachers employed? How are they going to keep all of the police employed? How are they going to set up the vaccine centers and the testing centers? This does that. This helps make sure that we can get people through the pandemic. And for people like me who have school-age children, I have 4 school-age kids who have not been in-person school in a year now. This bill is going to get our kids back to in-person school. So it's incredibly exciting and really touches almost everyone in New Jersey.
You know, in a little bit, I'm going to talk to a mayor from your district. I'm going to talk to a soup kitchen in your area to try, if I can, to just look at in one district in this country to get an idea the granular impact this is really going to have. I think in a generation, I can't remember something that's going to hopefully help those people right on the edge. But how about to the state here, and for states across this country? But let's just talk about New Jersey. If aid didn't come in this, and I know you've been working really hard along with Senator Menendez and others on this, if there wasn't a package to the states and municipalities, talk about some of the triage that these states were going to have to do and still might have to do with some really tough budget decisions.
Sure. I think that's a great point. And I know you're going to talk to people like Mayor Kasnark about exactly how this has been impacting his town and towns across New Jersey. And to your point about this being a generational type bill, the direct payments to poor families with children could alleviate childhood poverty in this country by 45%. So this really is a tremendous bill that can make systemic change across our country and really make the future brighter for millions of people. But here in New Jersey, if we hadn't gotten this bill, we're looking at laying off teachers as we're trying to get kids back into school. We're looking at laying off police officers as they're providing everything from security at our vaccine centers to taking care of people across the state. We're looking at not having enough money for those vaccine centers to get shots in arms. We'd be looking at not having enough money for testing and tracing to make sure we don't have another outbreak. Really, without this bill, I think the economic and personal damage to so many people across our state would have been far, far greater.
You know, I've heard from Republicans that, and not one voted for this, that this was not really focused on helping people impacted by COVID, that only a tiny fraction of it was. And if you do a literal reading of it, you would say technically that only X% really goes as it relates to the medical portion. But the economic impact from the last year, I mean, I don't think I have to educate anybody at home about this. There's very little, pardon my French, BS that's stuck in here. Isn't that right, Congresswoman? I mean, I went through this, and usually there has to be so many concessions, there has to be givebacks, private industries, et cetera. This is really about helping the people who need it. I'm not being Pollyannish. Tell me if I'm missing something, but it doesn't seem that there's a big hustle going on here. This is money to the people who need it most.
You know, this was a bill focused on taking care of people. This is the bill that, quite frankly, I've heard several times people saying, this is the bill you should have passed in the last administration. This is the bill that takes care of people in a crisis. This is Democratic leadership, I think, at its finest, making sure that we are leading from the front, that we are proactively helping people, that we are making sure we're looking to the future, ensuring that this global pandemic doesn't impact children and families and workers for decades to come, making sure that people feel secure. And then now we're looking forward. We've got this bill done, and we're already looking to how do we restart our economy now that we know we're going to get people vaccinated. We're going to take care of kids and get them back in school. We're going to make sure that we have the ability for our states and local governments to carry on through the pandemic, for our small businesses to get through the pandemic and maintain their employees. Now we're already looking to the next bill. So no, this is a very broad bill. People can argue over what should or could be in it. I had to fight back people who were trying to take money out of state and local funding at the 11th hour. But I have to tell you, this is a bill that focuses on the American people and how we take care of them.
It's not your job to explain Republican positions, but not one joined Democrats. I'm not the smartest guy, but I can read polls. The majority of Republicans liked a lot of the things, and nearly 3/4 of Americans like some of the key components of this. What am I missing here? Since when do politicians not like giving money to people who need it? Why is that bad politics?
I find it surprising as well, because I have to tell you, this has a lot of broad bipartisan support in my own district. I've heard from Republican mayors who are very, very thankful that they are going to be able to support their communities through this. Very thankful that they're now going to have the money to continue to employ their police officers and their teachers and get their kids back in school and get their people vaccinated. So I was surprised. And I think what you're seeing across the aisle is really a lack of understanding of how to make sure that our economy is strong, how to make sure we get the American public through this crisis and this pandemic, and then what we're going to see on the other side. I think it's a mistake not to support getting people through a global pandemic in this country.
And finally, Congresswoman, I remember when the ACA passed, and I've spoken subsequently to people that were involved in the last administration. I thought it was a big mistake, and I think they agree, that they thought the legislation would just speak for itself. And after the fact, they didn't put human faces. Eventually, in time, and the polling suggests people support it, but initially, until people felt it, they didn't know what they were getting. How important is it for the administration to put human faces on this, on how lives are going to be changed, how people won't lose their apartments, how they can put food on the table, how they can repair the car so they can get to work? To me, if this just passes and then everybody hopes people figure out on their own, I think that's a mistake.
I think you're right. I think we always have to make sure the American people understand what we're doing in Washington, because sometimes it's not really clear how these programs are going to impact their day-to-day lives. So I think that's a great point. I would also say, though, that so many people are going to feel directly impacted on the ground by what we're doing today. People who are going to see vaccinations roll out more quickly, people who are going to see their schools opening, people who are going to see those direct checks coming in to take care of their families through the rest of this pandemic. People who are going to see support for the food banks, which they desperately need because they're facing trouble feeding their kids and their families. So I think that impact is going to be directly felt by millions of people across the country, but I never underestimate the power of the individual stories so that you can really put a face to what's going on across the country, so you can really understand how the federal government is working for you and what exactly we're doing to make your life better.
Well, Congresswoman, again, thank you for the time. And I think when people always have questions about government, today was an example where government did right by the public. But again, thank you. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you, and thanks for having me.
I want to bring Andrew back. Obviously, as we heard from the Congresswoman, this is win-win for people who need it most. And unlike so much of the larded up pieces of legislation, even important legislation to get it through, this thing, and I'm saying this from the Fed, from every economist we can think of, even some conservative publications, that this will have a real positive impact, not just on the American economy, but more so desperately for the folks who need it. You made a reference off the top. You have to go back to the New Deal. I think that's the right comparison here, and this has the possibility that if this is rolled out the right way and people see the money and it's spent the way we think it will, that people might rethink the role of government again.
And it's interesting, the New Deal formed governmental structures and then used that to provide assistance to people and to put people to work. The stimulus plan is different in that it's much more direct towards people themselves with these child tax credits and the child payments and the stimulus checks. There are some government entities that will wind up providing some of that assistance as well, but it's more individually focused. The other thing about the New Deal that I kept thinking about is that some parts of it were invalidated and went away, but some parts have continued to this day, including Social Security. And that took responsibility by Congress and by presidents to make sure that that kept up. There are plenty of aspects of the stimulus deal that, if the government decides to make it a priority and continues doing it, could have real and lasting impacts and benefits.
Helping families with child care and stuff like that. But also, I think depending on how this is rolled out, and as I mentioned to the Congresswoman, the messaging is important. It's not just the signing ceremony. You got to keep explaining and showing people this was Joe in February of 2021, and look how he's doing now. He fixed his car so he can go back to work. His kid was able to get some medical care that they've been postponing for a while here. That's important. But I have learned not to get shocked anymore. But the Congresswoman said it. She has Republican mayors in her district talking about how important this was. Yeah. Republican governors en masse haven't come forward, but they've privately been saying they desperately need these monies. Andrew, I don't get the MIA on this from the Republican Party. I'm talking every member of the House and Senate on the GOP that didn't get behind this. For folks who missed it, I want to play a bite for the folks. And this was in a sparsely populated Congress today. But it wasn't just some other speech. Tim Ryan, Democrat from Ohio, said what I've been thinking, which is, what are Republicans doing? What are they talking about? Dr. Seuss and all the rest here, instead of a country riven with COVID and economic despair and trying to actually do something for the public.
Mr. Speaker, one of the earlier speakers said, this is the most dramatic change in labor law in 80 years. And I say, thank God. In the late 70s, a CEO made 35 times the worker. Today, it's 300 to 400 times the worker. And our friends on the other side running around with their hair on fire. Heaven forbid we pass something that's going to help the damn workers in the United States of America. Heaven forbid. We tilt the balance that has been going in the wrong direction for 50 years. We talk about pensions, you complain. We talk about the minimum wage increase, you complain. We talk about giving them the right to organize, you complain. But if we were passing a tax cut here, you'd be all getting in line to vote yes for it. Now stop talking about Dr. Seuss and start working with us on behalf of the American workers. I yield back the balance of my time.
Andrew, he said it better than I can, but the raw politics of this. Congresswoman said it, she doesn't get this. Usually when you give people money, they tend to like you for it. I think there was a miscalculation. I know there was a miscalculation made by the GOP. I think they know they miscalculated on this. But I don't get it.
I mean, other than getting every Republican to vote no on the bill, they never organized their opposition to it, at least in any cogent way that I've been able to tell. There was opposition to the minimum wage, and when that was still part of the bill, that got a lot of attention from Republicans. But I've been looking at Republican arguments against it, and the one that keeps coming up is, boy, there's a lot of stuff in this bill that has nothing to do with COVID relief. So it's, extra stuff, and it's a liberal, it's a giveaway to liberals. Which is fine. I mean, there's some validity to that argument, I guess. But people at home are going to be getting these checks and these child tax credits and these additional benefits for children and these additional benefits on other things too. And they're going to be thinking to themselves, this is COVID help. But I got the COVID help.
I don't even, you're being generous. I don't think that's true. I mean, I have seen monstrosities of legislation put together that has thrown in everything but having to do with it. When they're talking about helping with child care, when they're talking about extending some of the health care benefits, that's directly for COVID. People lost their jobs during COVID. People couldn't, food assistance. That's because they couldn't put food on the table because of COVID. It's all interconnected, or the overwhelming majority of it is. And to me, it's more than specious. They're just wrong. And they're wrong by the polling here as to what the public wants.
And the question is, will the public remember that as we approach the 2022 midterms?
That's where the messaging becomes important, Andrew. Thank you. All right, when we come back here, we're going to go from the Congresswoman's right to her district here. We're going to be speaking with the mayor of one of the towns there dealing with a huge hole in its budget and its needs for the stimulus money to pay for essential services like firefighters and educating kids.